I watched the footage for the fourth time at 11:52 on a Wednesday night, sitting alone at the kitchen island with the volume turned all the way down, even though there was no one else in the house to hear it. The first time, I told myself I'd misread it. The angle was bad. The lighting in our living room does something strange around 4 in the afternoon when the sun comes through the west-facing windows, and I am, by nature, someone who looks for the innocent explanation before I look for anything else. That's not a virtue I'm claiming. It's just true. I wanted the innocent explanation badly enough that I found it. Briefly, somewhere in the first 10 seconds of that clip. The second time, I watched it because the first viewing hadn't actually convinced me of the innocent explanation. It had just delayed the moment where I stopped believing in one. The third time, I watched with my hand over my mouth, which is a thing I didn't realize I was doing until my jaw started to ache from how hard I was pressing. The fourth time, I didn't feel anything at all. That's the part I still think about, honestly, more than the footage itself. How by the fourth viewing, some part of my brain had already filed it as fact, the way you stop reacting to a fire alarm once you've confirmed there's actually a fire and you're already moving toward the door. The footage was 9 minutes and 40 seconds long. It had been recorded that afternoon, on a camera I'd installed 6 weeks earlier to catch our new puppy chewing the leg of our dining console. It was not supposed to show me anything else. That was the whole design of the thing. Cheap, motion-activated, aimed low, at dog height, at a piece of furniture Otis had already ruined once and seemed determined to finish the job on. I want to explain how we got here, because I don't think any of this makes sense without the 6 months before it. And I want to be upfront that I'm not going to tell you I confronted my wife that night, because I didn't. I sat with that footage until almost 1 in the morning, closed the laptop, went to bed next to her like nothing had happened, and didn't say a single word about it for 11 more days. I had a reason for that. I'll get to it. Claire and I got married 3 years ago, in a backyard, in October, with maybe 40 people and a caterer who ran out of the vegetarian option before half the guests had gone through the line, which became a joke between us for longer than it probably deserved to be. She worked in marketing for a regional healthcare system when we met, the kind of job with a title that changed every 18 months without the actual work changing very much, and she was laid off about 8 months before any of this happened. In one of those quiet corporate restructurings where 40 people get an email on a Tuesday and nobody quite knows why those specific 40. She took it hard for about 2 weeks and then, in a way I actually admired at the time, decided to go freelance instead of scrambling for another in-house role. Social media strategy, mostly, for small local businesses, a dentist's office, 2 restaurants, a boutique gym. Steady enough work, done almost entirely from home, on her own schedule, which is a detail that's going to matter in a minute. For most of that first year of her freelancing, our days had a rhythm I didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. We'd both be at the kitchen table by 8, coffee going cold beside our laptops, and around noon, one of us would get up and make something for lunch, without either of us really deciding whose turn it was. She'd read me bad taglines her clients had rejected and ask which one I hated least. I'd complain about a stakeholder who wanted a feature built in a way that would break in production within a month, and she'd nod along without understanding a word of it, the way you do for someone you love. It wasn't romantic in any cinematic sense. It was just present, the specific, unglamorous intimacy of being in the same room as someone all day, every day, for almost a year. I didn't know, at the time, how much I'd come to associate that ordinary closeness with the marriage itself, or how much smaller the house would start to feel once 1 day a week of it got carved away. I work in product management for a software company, and about a year before the layoff, my team had shifted to a hybrid schedule, 4 days remote, 1 day in the office, a standing Wednesday requirement for a leadership sync that upper management had decided needed to happen in a physical room for reasons nobody below director level ever fully understood. So for a year, Wednesdays were the one day a week Claire and I weren't home together. Every other day, we were both in the house, working from opposite ends of the same table most of the time, which had always felt, to me, like one of the genuinely good parts of our marriage. Not every couple gets to spend that much ordinary time in the same room. We got Otis about 4 months before the footage. He was a rescue, part golden retriever, and part something with more energy than either of us had accounted for, roughly 4 months old when we brought him home, all paws and unearned confidence. We'd talked about getting a dog for over a year before we actually did it, half joking at first, about wanting a trial run before we started seriously discussing kids, which in hindsight is a strange thing to admit was part of the calculation, but it was. Claire wanted to know what it felt like to be responsible for something small and needy before we committed to a version of that we couldn't return. We found him at a county shelter about 40 minutes outside the city. On a Saturday, we'd told each other, more than once in the car on the way there, we weren't going to actually adopt anything. We were just looking, the way everyone says right before they come home with an animal. There were 6 puppies in the pen when we walked in, and 5 of them rushed the fence the second they saw us. Otis was the one in the back corner, chewing determinedly on the edge of a cinder block like it had personally wronged him, completely uninterested in whether we existed. Claire crouched down, and he ignored her for a full minute before he finally wandered over, sniffed her hand once, and went right back to the cinder block. She looked up at me and said, "That one," like it wasn't even a question. I asked her, half joking, why she wanted the one dog in the room that clearly wanted nothing to do with either of us. She said something I've thought about a lot since, that she liked that he wasn't performing for us, that everything else in that pen was doing exactly what you'd expect a puppy to do to get chosen, and he was just being himself, chewing on a piece of concrete, completely unbothered by the audience. I didn't think much of it at the time beyond finding it a little charming. I think about it differently now. Otis, as it turned out, was a lot needier than either of us expected. He had what our vet called a mild case of separation anxiety, which is a clinical way of saying that if you left him alone in a room for more than 40 minutes, he would find the single most expensive object in that room and turn it into confetti. He'd already destroyed one corner of our couch, both straps of a leather bag Claire's mother had given her, and, memorably, the baseboard trim in the hallway, which cost us $400 and an extremely awkward conversation with our landlord before we bought the place outright a year later. The dining console was the latest casualty. A mid-century piece we'd found at an estate sale and refinished ourselves over a long weekend, genuinely one of my favorite objects in the house, and Otis had taken a real interest in the front left leg of it specifically, the way dogs sometimes fixate on one exact spot for reasons no one can explain. We tried crating him. He howled so consistently and so miserably that our downstairs neighbor, this was still in the rental, before the house, left a note on our door that managed to be polite and furious at the same time. We tried a dog walker for the days neither of us could be fully present, which helped some but not enough, since Otis's worst behavior seemed to cluster specifically around Wednesdays, the one day Claire was home alone with him for a full 8 hours instead of having me at the other end of the table as backup. So we did what I think most people in our position do eventually. We bought a camera. It was a cheap one, honestly, the kind you find in a targeted ad after your phone overhears you complaining about your dog to a friend. $60, motion activated, connects to an app that sends a push notification and a 15-second preview clip every time it detects movement in frame. We positioned it on a bookshelf across from the dining console, angled low, specifically to catch Otis in the act, partly out of genuine curiosity about what he actually did all day, and partly because our vet had suggested it might help us figure out what was triggering the anxiety in the first place. A delivery truck? A neighbor's dog? Something specific we could actually address instead of guessing. For the first few weeks, it worked exactly the way we wanted it to. I'd get a notification around 10 in the morning, open it on my phone during a meeting, and there'd be Otis, mid-lunge at the console leg, guilty the second the flash of movement gave him away, like he somehow understood the camera meant he'd been caught, even though there was no possible way he understood any such thing. It became a small, dumb pleasure of my week. Claire and I would sometimes send each other the clips with no comment at all, just the video, and that was its own kind of language between us. Look what our idiot dog did this time. There was one clip, from maybe the second week, that we must have each watched a dozen times. Otis, mid-destruction, freezing completely at the sound of a car door 2 houses down, holding a mangled throw pillow in his mouth like a smoking gun, staring directly into the lens with an expression of total, unearned innocence. Claire set it as her phone's lock screen for a while. I pulled it up once at a work happy hour when someone asked about the new puppy and got a bigger laugh out of my team than anything I'd actually shipped that quarter. It's strange, looking back, how much good faith one dumb, blurry clip of a dog can buy in a marriage. How it becomes a kind of shorthand for the fact that you're still, underneath everything else, a unit, laughing at the same small thing at the same time. I noticed the pattern shift gradually, and I want to be honest that I noticed it as a pattern in Otis's behavior long before I noticed it as anything else. Wednesdays started producing fewer notifications, not more, which struck me as strange, since Wednesday was supposed to be his worst day, the one day he had the least company. I remember mentioning it to Claire once, almost in passing, something like, "Otis has been so good on Wednesdays lately, what changed?" And her saying something about how she'd started giving him a frozen peanut butter Kong before her afternoon calls to keep him occupied, which was a perfectly reasonable answer, and I believed it completely, because there was no reason not to. The truth, which I wouldn't understand for another 5 weeks, was that the camera wasn't recording less activity on Wednesdays. It was recording activity in a different part of the room than the console. Activity the app's motion detection zone hadn't been drawn around, because I'd set that zone up myself, back when the only thing I could imagine needing to catch was a dog. I found out by accident, in the most anticlimactic way possible. The app updated one weekend and reset some of my settings, including the custom motion zone, back to a default that covered the entire room instead of just the console corner. I didn't think much of it when I approved the update. I definitely didn't think about it again until the following Wednesday at 2:14 in the afternoon, when my phone buzzed during a product review meeting with a notification that read, simply, "Motion detected, living room," the way it always had, except this time the 15-second preview clip, glanced at under the table while my manager talked about a roadmap slide, showed my wife sitting closer to another man on our couch than I had ever, in 3 years of marriage, seen her sit next to anyone who wasn't me. I didn't open the full footage until I got home that night, after Claire had already gone to bed. I told her I had a deadline to finish up, which wasn't technically a lie, just not the deadline she assumed it was. That's the footage I described at the start of this. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. I watched it 4 times. I want to walk through what was actually in it, because I think the specifics matter more than the general shape of the thing, and because for a long time afterward, the specifics were all I could think about. The man in the footage was Tyler, a dog trainer we'd hired about 7 weeks earlier, right around the time Otis's Wednesday behavior had supposedly started improving, after a recommendation from another dog owner in our neighborhood group chat. He ran a small in-home training business, mostly word of mouth, a genuinely good reputation in our part of town, built almost entirely on a local community app where dog owners traded recommendations for walkers, sitters, groomers, trainers. We'd hired him for a standard package, 6 weekly sessions, 45 minutes each, working on leash manners and separation tolerance, scheduled, because of course they were, for Wednesday afternoons, since that was the day Claire's calendar was clearest, and the day, according to both of us at the time, Otis needed the help most. I remember the first session, actually, because I made a point of being home for it, working from the dining room table instead of my usual spot upstairs, mostly out of curiosity about how a professional would handle a dog we'd almost entirely failed to handle ourselves. Tyler showed up 12 minutes early, in a company polo with an embroidered paw print on the chest, and spent the first 10 minutes out on the porch with Otis before he ever came inside, letting the dog approach him on his own terms instead of the other way around. I remember thinking, with the specific, slightly competitive irritation of watching someone else be effortlessly good at something you've been failing at for months, that he was clearly very good at his job. He was easy with Claire too, in the unremarkable way service people often are with clients. Friendly, a little funny, quick with a compliment about the house that didn't feel like flattery so much as genuine observation. He noticed the console, actually, on that first visit, and asked if it was original mid-century or a reproduction, which led to a 5-minute conversation about the estate sale where we'd found it, the kind of small, easy exchange that happens in 100 service visits a year and means nothing at all, 99 times out of 100. I wasn't home for the second session, or the third, or any of the ones after that, Wednesdays being what they were, and I never thought to ask for much of a recap beyond the basics. Claire would mention, in passing, over dinner, that Otis had finally stopped pulling on the leash, or that Tyler had a theory about the separation anxiety being tied to the refrigerator's compressor cycling on and off, something that struck me at the time as either genuinely insightful or entirely made up, and which I never bothered to verify either way. I remember, once, her laughing at something on her phone at the table and saying, when I asked, that Tyler had sent a video of Otis finally sitting on command. I remember being glad, in the uncomplicated way you're glad when a problem in your life is quietly getting solved by someone competent, without asking myself a single question about why a dog trainer was texting my wife videos outside of scheduled session hours. In the footage, the 45-minute session appeared to have ended. Otis was asleep in his crate, worn out from whatever training had actually happened before the camera caught anything worth catching. Tyler and Claire were on the couch, no dog in the frame at all, sitting close enough that when she said something I couldn't make out, he laughed and put his hand on her knee in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with leash manners. What happened over the following 8 minutes, I'm not going to describe in detail, and not because I'm protecting anyone's dignity at this point. I'm not going to describe it because I don't think the specifics of it are the actual point of this story, and dwelling on them for your benefit would just be a different kind of dishonesty than the one Claire was already telling. What I'll say is that, by the end of the clip, there was no version of events left that involved leash manners, or separation anxiety, or anything at all related to the dog whose training had apparently concluded 8 minutes earlier. I sat with that footage for a long time before I did anything with it, and the first thing I did, before I told a single person, before I said a single word to Claire, was go back through the app's history. Not obsessively, not for hours. Methodically, the way I've spent my entire career testing software before it ships. You don't trust the first result, you don't trust the second result. You run it again, under slightly different conditions, until you're confident the behavior is consistent and not a fluke. It wasn't a fluke. Once I knew what I was looking for, I found 4 more clips going back 5 weeks, all Wednesdays, all time-stamped after what should have been the end of a 45-minute training session, all in that same corner of the couch, the motion zone catching just enough of each one before whoever was watching, nobody, as far as either of them knew, to make the pattern undeniable. 5 Wednesdays, roughly 5 weeks, right around the length of a 6-session training package. I remember sitting at the kitchen island that night, running the math the way I run every other number that's ever mattered to me, and thinking, with something that felt less like heartbreak and more like a diagnosis, this had a start date. It had a start date and a location and a recurring time slot, and if I was being honest with myself, it probably had an end date too, whenever the 6th training session ran out, and either one of them decided what came next. Once I knew what to look for, a handful of other details rearranged themselves in my memory without my having to search very hard for them. Claire had started running her errands almost exclusively on Wednesday mornings, before the sessions, which she'd explained once as wanting the house presentable for the trainer, a phrase that had sounded perfectly reasonable at the time and sounded like something else entirely now. She'd bought a new candle for the living room about 6 weeks earlier, something she'd said she'd wanted for a while, and I remembered, with a specificity that genuinely surprised me, that she'd lit it for the first time on a Wednesday. She'd started asking, more often than she used to, how long my Wednesday syncs usually ran, framed as ordinary curiosity about my schedule, which I'd answered honestly every single time, without once wondering why the answer mattered to her. None of it, individually, would have meant anything, and I want to be careful not to overstate how obvious any of this looked in real time. People buy candles. People ask about their spouse's schedule. If you go looking hard enough through any 6-week window of an otherwise ordinary marriage, you can probably find a dozen small details that look, in hindsight, like evidence. That's not insight. That's just what memory does once you've told it what to search for. But I'd be lying if I said none of it landed differently once I had the footage to organize it around. It wasn't that I'd missed obvious signs. It was that the signs had never been obvious at all until I already knew exactly what they were signs of. I didn't say anything to Claire for 11 days. I want to explain that because I know how it sounds, and I've had a lot of time since then to examine whether it was the right call or just the version of self-control I default to when I don't know what else to do with myself. Both are probably true. Part of it was practical. I wanted to be completely certain before I said a word, the same way I wouldn't push a feature live off a single passing test. I went back through 6 weeks of the app's full activity log, not just the clips that had triggered notifications, cross-referencing every Wednesday against Claire's own calendar, which she still shared with me for scheduling reasons, mostly so I'd know when she had client calls she couldn't be interrupted for. Every single Wednesday for the past 5 weeks, her calendar listed Otis training, 2 o'clock to 2:45. Every single one of those sessions, according to the camera, had actually run closer to an hour and 15 minutes. Part of it, though, and this is the part I'm less proud of, or at least less certain about, was that I didn't want to have the conversation alone with her. I didn't trust what would happen in a private confrontation, not because I thought I'd get violent, I want to be clear about that, but because I know myself well enough to know that Claire has always been better than me at reframing a conversation once it's underway. She's persuasive. It's part of what she's good at professionally. She can take an uncomfortable truth and repackage it into something that sounds almost reasonable by the time she's done talking. And I was genuinely afraid that if it was just the two of us in a room, I'd walk out of that conversation somehow apologizing to her. There was a night, about 6 days into the 11, when I nearly broke that plan entirely. Claire and I were doing the dishes together, an ordinary Tuesday, and she reached over to take a bowl out of my hands to dry it, the way she'd done 1,000 times before, and said something completely unrelated. A complaint about a client who kept changing his mind about a logo. And I remember standing there with soapy hands, watching her laugh at her own story, thinking that I could end this right now, just say the word Tyler out loud in this kitchen, and watch her face change. And some tired part of me wanted to, badly, just to stop carrying it alone for one more hour. I didn't, and I've asked myself many times since whether that was discipline or cowardice, and I still don't have a clean answer for it. What I told myself, standing at that sink, was the same thing I tell junior engineers on my team when they want to ship a fix the moment they find a bug. Finding the problem isn't the same as understanding it, and reacting to the first thing you see is usually how you end up solving the wrong issue entirely, or solving the right one in a way that creates 3 new ones. I wanted to understand the whole shape of it before I did anything that couldn't be undone. And if I'm honest, I wanted to make sure that when I finally did say something, There'd be no version of the conversation left where she could talk her way into making it smaller than it actually was. So I dried the bowl. I let her finish the story about the client. I said goodnight like I meant it, mostly because some stubborn, tired part of me still did. So I waited. Specifically, I waited for the second Sunday of the following month, because that was the one night I could count on someone else being in the house who Claire would never, under any circumstances, want to see her lose control in front of. Her mother, Diane, came for dinner on the second Sunday of every month. It had been a standing tradition since before I even knew Claire, something she and her mother had kept going through 2 apartments, one broken engagement to someone else entirely, and now 3 years of our marriage. Diane was sharp, direct, and this mattered more than almost anything else in my decision. The one person whose opinion Claire had never once, in 3 years, been able to talk her way around. I'd watched Claire win arguments with clients, with contractors, with her own siblings. I had never once watched her win an argument with her mother. I wasn't looking for an ally, exactly. I want to be precise about that, because it would be easy to make this sound more calculating than it actually was. I wasn't recruiting Diane to my side. I was choosing a setting where Claire would have to respond to what I was about to say as the actual truth, in real time, in front of someone whose reaction she couldn't control or predict, rather than a private room where I was afraid the truth might get quietly renegotiated into something smaller before the night was over. Diane arrived at 6, the way she always did, with a bottle of the same red wine she'd brought every second Sunday for 3 years, and a container of the lemon bars she made from her mother's recipe. Claire made her usual roast chicken. I set the table the way I always did, plates first, then silverware, then the water glasses. A small domestic choreography I'd performed probably 130 times over 3 years, without ever once thinking about what it would feel like to perform it for what I already knew, by then, was going to be the last time. I'd brought my laptop into the dining room beforehand and left it closed on the side table near the window, which Claire noticed and asked about once, casually, while we were plating the food. "Are you working tonight?" she said. I said, "Not exactly." She didn't push on it. I don't think she had any reason to. We got through most of dinner normally. Diane talked about a plumbing issue at her condo. Claire told a story about a client who wanted his gym's Instagram to look, in his words, more aspirational, which made all 3 of us laugh in a way that felt, for a few minutes, completely and uncomplicatedly real. I remember thinking, somewhere around the second glass of wine, how strange it was that a marriage could be this ordinary and this finished at exactly the same time, in the exact same room, without either fact canceling the other one out. I waited until Diane had started on her lemon bars before I got up, retrieved the laptop, and set it down on the table between the serving dish and the bread basket. Claire said, "What's that?" I opened it, without answering right away. I'd already queued up the clip, the first one, the shortest, the one from 5 weeks earlier that needed the least explanation once it was playing. I said, "This is from the puppy camera." Diane said, "Is Otis okay?" Already half smiling, expecting reasonably some new piece of dog-related chaos to laugh about. I said, "Otis is fine. Watch the couch, not the dog." I want to be honest that I don't remember every word of what came after with perfect precision. That part of the night moves differently in my memory than the rest, faster in some places and unbearably slow in others. But I remember the shape of it clearly enough, and I remember exactly how it started. Diane went still about 4 seconds into the clip. Claire reached for the laptop to close it, and I put my hand flat on the table next to it, not blocking her exactly, just present enough that she stopped. She said, "Turn that off." I said, "There are 4 more like it, different Wednesdays. I can play all of them if you'd like, or you can just tell your mother what she's looking at." Diane said, "Claire, what is this?" Claire said, "It's not what it looks like." I said, "It's 9 minutes and 40 seconds of exactly what it looks like. I've watched it more than once." Diane said, "Who is that man?" Claire didn't answer right away, so I did. I said, "That's Tyler, the dog trainer we've been paying to work with Otis for the last 7 weeks. According to your calendar, Claire, the sessions run 45 minutes. According to the camera, they've been running closer to an hour and 15 for the last month." Claire said, "You've been spying on me." I said, "I set up a camera to catch a puppy chewing on furniture. I didn't go looking for this. I found it because the app reset a setting I didn't ask it to reset, and once I saw it, I checked to make sure I wasn't wrong before I said anything to anyone. I wasn't wrong." Diane said, again, quieter this time, "How long, Claire?" Claire said, "It's not, Mom. It's complicated. It's not what either of you think it is." I said, "I think it's exactly what your mother thinks it is. I think the only complicated part is how long you were planning on letting it keep being Wednesdays." That's when she started crying, and I want to say clearly that I don't think the crying was fake. I've turned this over enough times since then to be fairly confident it was real distress, real fear, real shame, all arriving at once, in front of the one person she'd never managed to outmaneuver. She said, "I don't know how this happened. It wasn't supposed to turn into anything. He was just easy to talk to, and things at home had felt so..." I said, "Don't finish that sentence like it's my fault. I'm not going to sit here and let you turn this into something about how distant I've been. I was in this house every day except one." Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "You don't understand what it's been like, being home alone all the time since the layoff. You still had your job, your team, people around you all day. I had a laptop and a dog." I said, "You had a business you chose to build from home. Nobody made that decision but you, and I supported it the whole way, including paying for the trainer you were apparently entertaining instead of supervising." Diane said, "Don't twist his patience into a weapon against him, Claire." That's not fair, which surprised me, honestly, coming as fast as it did, before I'd even had a chance to feel defensive on my own behalf. Claire said, "I'm not trying to make this his fault. I know it isn't. I don't know how to explain what it turned into. It didn't feel like something happening to our marriage while it was happening. It felt like something happening on a Wednesday, in a completely separate part of the week, like it belonged to a different version of my life I could just close the door on by Thursday morning." I said, "It doesn't work that way. There's one week. There's one marriage. You don't get a separate Wednesday version of it just because you kept it off the calendar." She didn't have an answer for that. Diane reached over and put her hand flat on the table, not on Claire's hand, not on mine, just on the wood between the two of us, like she was trying to hold the whole table steady. She said, "I want to know one thing, and I want an honest answer, because God knows we're past the point of anything else tonight. Were you ever going to tell him yourself, or was this always going to end exactly like this, him finding it some other way, some other time?" Claire was quiet long enough that the answer became obvious before she said anything at all. When she finally spoke, it was almost to herself. "I don't know. I think some part of me was hoping it would just end on its own, once the sessions ran out, and nobody would ever have to say anything." I said, "That's not an ending. That's just hoping the evidence disappears before anyone goes looking for it." Nobody said anything else for a moment. It sat there on the table, next to the laptop, next to the lemon bars, until Diane finally said what she said next. Diane said, "That's enough, both of you," in a voice I recognized immediately, the one she used, apparently, to end arguments that had never once actually worked on her own daughter before that night. It worked this time. Claire stopped talking. So did I. Diane looked at me for a long moment, and then at Claire, and said something I've thought about more than almost anything else from that night. I raised you better than this, and I like him more than I've ever told either of you. So you're going to sit here and figure out what you're actually going to say to him, because I am not leaving this table until you do." Claire didn't have much of an answer, in the end. Neither of us really expected one. I moved out 3 weeks later, into a rental about 15 minutes away, and Otis came with me. A decision Claire didn't fight, which surprised me a little, until I understood that she'd already started associating the dog with the camera, the couch, and the entire unraveling, in a way that made it easier for her to let him go than to keep him. The divorce took about 7 months, mostly uncontested, mostly quiet, the kind of ending that doesn't give you a dramatic final scene so much as a long series of small administrative ones, separating bank accounts, dividing furniture, including, at my insistence, the dining console with the chewed front leg, which I refinished a second time and kept. Telling people was its own strange process, one I hadn't anticipated needing to manage on top of everything else. My parents were quietly furious in the specific way parents get when their disappointment has nowhere useful to go. A couple of our mutual friends tried, for a while, to stay neutral in a way that felt less like fairness and more like avoidance, and I let most of those friendships go without much of a fight, mostly because I didn't have the energy to keep remaking a case I'd already proven once, at a dinner table, with video evidence. The friends who didn't bother trying to stay neutral, who just showed up with takeout and let me not talk about it if I didn't feel like it, are mostly still around. I've noticed that's usually how it sorts itself out, in the end. Not everyone picks a side, but the ones worth keeping generally pick you. I never confronted Tyler directly. I didn't have to. About a month after the dinner with Diane, I wrote a long, factual, entirely unemotional review on the same neighborhood app where we'd originally found him. No accusations, no editorializing, just an account of what our sessions had actually looked like on camera, including the discrepancy between the scheduled time and the actual time, framed the way I'd frame any other product feedback. Here's what was promised, here's what was delivered, here's the gap between them. I didn't mention Claire by name. I didn't need to. Within 2 months, 3 other clients had posted variations of the same question in the same group. Had anyone else noticed their sessions running unusually long? And within 4 months, Tyler had quietly stopped taking new clients in our neighborhood altogether. I heard, secondhand, through the same dog owner group chat that had originally recommended him, that he'd eventually dropped the in-home model entirely and switched to board and train only, out at a facility 20 minutes outside town, away from anyone's living room. I don't know if that was a business decision or just the only version of the job he could still do without a couch anywhere nearby. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard it. I mostly just thought, in the same flat, procedural way I think about most things now, that it made a certain kind of sense. Some jobs probably shouldn't be done inside someone else's house, and it took losing this one for him to find that out. Diane still calls me, occasionally, mostly to check in, and once, memorably, to ask if Otis needed anything for his birthday, which is either the strangest or the kindest thing anyone did for me that whole year, and I still haven't decided which. I think about the camera more than I probably should, not the footage itself. I deleted all of it eventually, once the divorce was final, once there was no version of my life left that required proof of anything. What I think about is how completely accidental the whole discovery was. I didn't install that camera looking for evidence of anything. I installed it to protect a piece of furniture from a dog who didn't know any better. It caught something else entirely, purely because I'd drawn the wrong box around the wrong corner of a room, and an app update redrew it for me. I don't know what to do with that, honestly. Whether it means something, or whether it just means cameras don't know the difference between a dog and a marriage, and neither, really, did the room they were both sitting in. Sometimes I think about the version of that Wednesday where the app never resets a setting, where the motion zone stays drawn tightly around one dining console leg for the rest of Otis's puppyhood, catching nothing but a dog being a dog forever. I don't know how long that version of my marriage would have lasted before something else eventually gave it away, or whether it ever would have. I've stopped assuming that ignorance and happiness are the same thing, even though there were plenty of days in that particular version of events where they would have looked completely identical from the outside. Otis is almost 2 now. He stopped chewing furniture entirely, for reasons no trainer ever managed to explain to me. He still won't go near the couch in my new living room though. He sleeps on the floor next to it instead, every single time, like some part of him remembers exactly what that piece of furniture is capable of holding. If you've ever caught something you weren't even looking for, drop "caught" in the comments below.